is Tuesday, November the 12th, 2024. Mrs. Camphouse, would you call the roll, please?
Mr. Atwood.
Present.
Ms. Ballard. Present. Mrs. Rarica.
Present.
Mr. Taylor.
Present.
Mrs. Cole.
Present. All right, if you would please stand for the pledge.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right, item 3 tonight is the adoption of the agenda. Do I have a motion to adopt?
I'll second.
Any discussion? Mrs. Camphouse?
Mr. Atwood.
Yes.
Ms. Ballard. Yes. Mrs. Rarica.
Yes.
Mr. Taylor.
Yes.
Mrs. Cole.
Yes. All right, with that approved, we can move on to item 4. This is our discussion items. And 4.01, we have our treasurer, Mrs. Camphouse, and tonight she is going to present to us her 5-year forecast. So at this time, Mrs. Camphouse, I will turn it over to you.
Thank you, Madam President. So twice a year, I do a new forecast. It's November and May. And, it was working. Oh, thank you. So we're going to discuss that today. On this slide, you'll see our projected general fund revenue of $32,618,000 is greater than our projected general fund expenditures of $32,460,000 for a projected gain for this year of $155,870. That will this is a positive cash flow that we're anticipating for this year. And as estimated in the forecast, this will be the last year of positive cash flow. Of our total expected revenues, in this slide you'll see in the blue, our local taxes make up 59% of our total revenues. So you'll see local taxes are very dear to us. Our state funding is only at 28%, and just as a side note, that is falling. All other revenue is 13%, and in addition, that one is falling as you look at it through the forecast period. You look at those numbers, you compare the same kind of numbers on the expenditure side, you'll see personnel costs are at 76% in the blue area of the pie chart. Purchase services are at 18%, and all other expenditures are at 6%. When considering that some of our purchase services are also personnel related, like cleaning and transportation, it is clear that we've exceeded 80% of our budget on personnel. It is typical to have a very heavy personnel cost for school districts as we are a service industry. However, 80% is kind of pushing that guideline where it's just getting pretty high for personnel. When considering estimated revenues in the blue line and expenditures in the yellow line throughout the forecast period, you will see that expenditures outpace revenues in fiscal year 26, which is next year, and will worsen throughout the forecast period. Revenues are expected to grow annually by 1.86%, and expenditures are expected to grow by 4.45%, leading us deeper into negative cash flow every year. This graph compares historical rates of change to projected rates of change for revenues. Our historical rate of change is 1.76% annually, and estimated is 1.86% annually for revenues. However, if you look at that real estate line, you'll see that the historical average change was $408,000, and then we're estimating $582,000 moving forward. These increases, although averaged over the past 5 years or the future 5 years, are actually all due to the 2023 tax year residential valuation increase. We have seen all of this change last year and this year. Unfortunately, this valuation increase has also caused our state funding and all other revenue funding to decrease. This is why, despite real estate tax increases, our total revenue is only increasing 1.86% annually for the future forecast period, despite nice gains that we're seeing in real estate taxes. When you do the same thing on the expenditure side, you'll see that salaries and benefits have increased greatly. This is due to the expiration of ESSER funds. ESSER was a federal stimulus funding. It was a grant fund, so those costs were not reflected into the general fund. Now that ESSER is expended fully and expired, all those costs are coming back to the general fund. If you listen to me talk about the forecast in the past, you'll hear me talk about an expenditure cliff. That's where we're at this year and last year. We've hit the cliff. All those costs are coming back to the general fund. And so you'll see that's why looking at the projected compared to historical, or just look at the projected average annual changes over at $1 million moving forward. That's almost all this year. We're just seeing a really large increase this year in salaries due to ESSER going away. Same thing with benefits. Purchase services is growing rapidly due to special education contracted costs and related transportation. All other uses transfers out have virtually ended as the negative cash flow doesn't allow for those transfers anymore. The historic rate of change for expenditures is 1.99. Keep in mind that that was a false number, really, when you think that so many of our expenditures were absorbed by ESSER in the past. Now the projected change rate of change is 4.45% moving forward. Since our estimated revenues are growing slower than our estimated expenses, our negative cash flow gets progressively worse, and you'll see that in that black line. In the green, in 22, 23, 24, those are the past years. 25 is the current year. You'll see we're pretty healthy in the green. 26, we start getting into the yellow, which is cautionary. 27 is yellow. 28 is, and then 29, you'll see we start getting into that orangey red color, and that actually does qualify us in the fiscal watch area. Now, that doesn't mean that we're going to end in fiscal watch. There's a lot of different things that have to happen before we hit fiscal watch. And I'm always the first person to say, let's just look at the first 3 years of the forecast. You know, by the time the treasurer gets done being conservative with revenues and conservative with expenditures, you know, worst case with expenditures, those last 2 years are pretty far out. So, you know, we're going to keep in mind the first 3 years of the 5-year forecast. But before we do lose too much of our cash balance, if these estimates do come true, we need to make a budget adjustments in order to maintain positive cash flow. As we discussed in the last slide, we are spinning into our carryover with negative cash flow annually starting next year. As this happens throughout the forecast period, we will be using up our cash balance until we will be left with 72 days of cash in fiscal year 29. We do have a board policy that defines a minimum cash balance at 90 days. This slide is going to compare my last forecast, which was in May, to the current November forecast. And so this slide shows our negative cash flow as stated in the past May forecast, as well as our new November forecast. So that you'll see that our current forecast and the solid black line is slightly worse, but we're still trending in the same direction that our forecasts have shown for several years. Both last May's and our current forecast define the same trend of revenues growing slower than expenses, leaving us vulnerable to a reducing cash balance. Another thing I'd like to point out on this slide is we're ending in the yellow on this slide, and that's because it ends in 2028. Last May's forecast did not have 29 on it, so there's nothing to compare it to, so we're not comparing 29. Three categories with the most change that I've seen since the May forecast. While property tax revenues have increased due to the 2023 valuation, both state funding and all other funding is dropping due to the new valuation. Personnel costs in the general fund have grown due to the loss of ESSER grant funding that is now spent and expired. Purchase services and transportation have grown more than typical in the future. Typo. I have a positive slide here. Yay. District educated enrollment. So you'll see in 2020, we had 1,727 students here at Norwood. And that number dropped, although it started dropping less in the last couple of years. However, in fiscal year 25, which is our current year, you'll see we have growth from 1,558 last year to 1,570 this year. And we are still enrolling students, so we're happy to have them. I do have slight projected growth in the forecast. We do expect to see maybe more growth than what I have in the forecast, but the forecast is reviewed by both the Department of Education and Workforce Development and by the Auditor of State. So a conservative number here is in our best interest. We do plan to see better growth than that, however. We do know that the changes that we've made in with open enrollment, Montessori, and other programming have drawn parents to Norwood, and we've seen a lot of growth because of that. As our expenditures grow, our per pupil general fund expenditures grow also, of course. So this is just our total expenditures divided by how many students do we have. This is really nice for benchmarking, so we can compare to other districts and see, not only the total number, how much do we spend per student, but how do we spend that number? And that's a whole different set of complicated that I won't bring up in public session. So you don't have to worry about that. But in 2025, you'll see that our per pupil spending is just a bit over $20,000, and that continues to grow throughout the forecast period. Again, a lot of this growth is due to ESSER fund going away and those costs coming back to the general fund. That's why we see these dramatic growth between 22 and 23. And between 23 and 24, and again in 25. However, when you take the per pupil expenditures and break them down on a daily basis, you will see that our parents receive a quality education for their children for only $115 per student per day. That number probably compares very favorably to daycare, and you're getting a quality education by a certified teacher. However, when you subtract all the commercial and state sources of revenues, that cost dropped to $39.10 per day as a cost borne by our taxpayer for local taxes. Norwood City Schools truly provides a well-rounded, great education as a great value for our taxpayers. Are there any questions? I know I ran right through that really fast. Any other slides you want me to go back to? Any other questions?
Thank you for stretching those ESSER dollars so far out into the forecast, because that really did help us quite a bit. So thank you for being wise with that.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And something that's not shown on here, but our cash balance is pretty nice because we had those ESSER savings. And so we do have a nicer cushion to hold on to for rainy days that we're moving into. So we were very careful with our spending. We did really great things. We saw some of our expenditures from ESSER that will benefit the district for 30 years. And we improved instruction. We did a lot of really great things with those ESSER dollars.
So I think it's amazing the work that we were able to do and the work that you were able to do in the administration and trying to be such fiscally responsible to our taxpayers, and that when the cliff did come and, we've hit it, that, we're not seeing to be into a potential fiscal watch area until 2029. Right, where we hit the level where we have to have a plan in place because we're below the board threshold for cash on hand. Some of our peer school districts, when they have gone through the cliff, they're completely upside down and having to find emergency sources of revenue. So we're not there. And, it's a big thank you to the administration and to you and to our taxpayers.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's just a really great point, because if you think back to before ESSER, which it's hard to remember because, we had a lot of money that we could do things that we needed to do with. But if you think back to ESSER, that was a typical forecast. It was typical to see those last 2 years of a forecast in a very, negative way. And so we're just back at that again because ESSER's gone. So even though it looks really alarming to us now, this is how school districts have operated for years. And, it happens little by little. You try to improve your revenues a tiny little bit. You work on your budget. And in between the two sides, you manage to get a little bit closer each year, the forecast, and try to avoid deficit spending. And that's what we'll continue to do.
The one big concern that I have, and it's not, anything that we can really have any impact on, is the portion that's state funded. So if you look at that, 5 years ago, we were getting about $7.2 million of our, annual revenue through state funding. And then now we're still getting $7.2 million through state funding. But the way that dollar stretches today isn't the same that $7.2 million went 5 years ago. It's going to be the same 5 years later. And we'll probably still be getting $7.2 million.
Exactly.
It's like chewing on a piece of gum for too long. It just starts to keep sticking.
Right.
That's a good analogy.
But eventually that source of revenue from the state, it's going to be unsustainable. And so, there's going to be a future board that's just going to have to have that battle.
Yeah. Make decisions based on that.
Yeah,
Right.
big decisions as are going to be based on that because of how the state funds public.
Exactly.
I
And we're not the
appreciate-
only district in that same boat.
I appreciate the cost per pupil too, because usually you just see the big numbers,
Yeah.
and people don't speak in those big numbers. They're just like, cost of schools are too high, and this is too high. And it's like, you spend $40 a day on your kid to go to school.
Taxpayers too, yeah.
That's how much. And if even at 115, like per day, what did you pay for daycare? What cost? You're feeding them. You've got a safe place for them. You've got an education base.
Certified teachers that are excellent. So
And so
Right.
the per day cost for that investment is really crucial. And when people are like, well, I don't even have kids in the district. I don't have kids in the district, but I want to raise good neighbors, good community members, good people who are going to be growing up in their community and come back and serve in it. So for me to say I'm spending $40 a day for these kids to have a safe place to get a good quality education with a lot of access to all kinds of different clubs and music groups and sports teams and everything that we provide, that's nothing. It's nothing. We're doing a great job with it. So
I agree. Thank you for all those comments.
we appreciate the work. I know you were nervous about doing all this for today, especially after being gone for the conference, but thank you for putting this
Busy couple
together.
days.
And
It
it's
wasn't
been
as colorful as
fantastic.
usual, but
I know.
it was just as clear and understandable as ever.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
I really appreciate also the two different numbers, because some people might see that 115 and go, we spend 115 per kid per day. What? I'm
Right.
paying for that? No, you're not.
Exactly.
And the 40.
Yeah. That's true.
The other stuff comes from other places.
Yeah.
Thank you, Mrs. Camp House.
You are welcome.
All right, continuing on, we are at item 5 on the agenda. This is our personnel superintendent recommendations. So with that, I will be turning it over to our superintendent, Mrs. Ronan.
Thank you, Madam President. In 5.01 resignation, we have 4 individuals who are leaving us. We want to thank them for their service. As you can see, they're coaches, yearbook advisors, HVAC folks, and student assistant aides. So thank you to all those individuals who served us and now are leaving. Under 5.02, item number 1, this is exciting. We have a half a dozen individuals who have gotten their T9S certificate. That means they passed the approved training course, so they can actually drive our new van and drive students in the new van. They had to go through extensive training. Item number 2, these are supplemental contracts for teachers. As you can see, the orchestra director, silhouettes director, and also our technology integration specialist. Item 3, avenues for success, club advisors. Number 4 is simply a change in status where individuals are moving from maybe being half-time to full-time. And item number 5, we are still hiring for winter sports, as you can see, and also classified staff for avenues for success in those 2 items. And thank you. That concludes my personnel report.
Thank you, Superintendent Ronan. Continuing on, item 6 on the agenda, this is our Education Committee, and I will turn it over to Mrs. Rarica.
I don't know why I was caught off guard there. Thank you, Madam President. I was just staring at what was on there. Okay, we have 3 field trips coming up. Williams going to Xavier University, right down the road. Sharpsburg going to Green Acres, and also the Montessori going to Green Acres. And that's it.
Green Acres is a popular destination.
It is. I wonder, I don't know, but I know I worked at a place that would get grants that would provide transportation. I wonder if Green Acres does something like that for us and why we have such a great partnership with them.
I don't think at the moment, but you're right. In the past, there have been grants for transportation.
Or some other thing.
Right now, we're working with the Museum Center, and they do have some transportation dollars for students to go on field trips there, but I don't think Green Acres at the moment.
Or why we're so connected with them. I'm glad we are. I've been on so many of the field trips with my own kids. They have different locations, and I've been to several different of them, and pounded rocks. That was fun.
All right, continuing on, item 7, this is Policy Committee, and I will turn it over at this time to Vice President Taylor.
Thank you, Madam President. Next week, we have the second reading of the 19 policies that I read last. That's it.
Oh, sorry, I thought we don't introduce new ones till we do the second readings, right?
Only
Okay,
Next month it'll be
19.
the other.
okay.
Holy.
Because I heard we're having another big month, so I
But we
was,
read these last month too,
Next
right?
month, right?
yes, yes.
Okay, yeah.
So
I was like, these look familiar. Yeah.
all right, so we'll get these approved next week and then have another ginormous set next month. Something to look forward to. All right, item 8, this is Building and Grounds, and I will turn this over to Ms. Ballard.
Thank you, Madam President. We have one event request for usage for Bigger Than Sneakers. The Norwood High School gym is wanting to do this for a nonprofit holiday gift giving event on Sunday, December 15th. Our athletic staff is going to be on hand for it. They have hosted several events for our students in the past and continue to do so. This event is open to the Norwood community as well, and they'll be taking care of everything, including the liability and all the waivers and that kind of thing. Should be a good event.
Yeah, I think I remember. I think this is a contact of Athletic Director, Mr. Richardson. I believe this is a contact he has, and it was pretty cool.
Oh, and it looks, I just found the time on here. It's from 2 to 8. So anybody who wants to put that on their calendar, Sunday, December 15th from 2 to 8 p.m. And they'll be in there giving out shoes for our families in need.
All right, item 9 on the agenda, this is Finance Committee, so I will turn it over again to Treasurer Mrs. Campos.
Thank you, Madam President. 9.01 on the agenda. All the financials, the monthly financials and the CFO report are attached for your review. Actually, only the CFO report. I'll get the rest of those on there for next week. 9.02 is the appropriation resolution, which is our budget for the current year. 9.03 amended official certificate. That is our amended revenues for the current year. 9.04, the forecast. Next week, we will adopt the forecast, and I will send it to the Department of Education and Workforce Development for their use. They do display that on their website, and it is an official document for them to use in planning for the district. 9.05, a resolution to approve a modified tax budget. So every year, annually, we adopt a tax budget, which is a document that is very important to the county auditor. And it doesn't serve a lot of purpose for us. We are allowed to use it as a modified tax budget. Is helpful for me. And that's all I have for finance.
Okay. Thank you, Mrs. Camphouse. That brings us to item 10 on the agenda, which is adjournment. Do I have a motion to adjourn?
A motion?
I'll second.
Any discussion?
I just want to also say real quick, because yesterday, Happy Veterans Day to all who have served, especially to those in our district who have served, and we really appreciate those. And I know that I'm hopeful we'll have some photos from our students' usual Veterans Day event next week. to
Yes,
look forward
next
to.
week we'll have them. It was a lovely celebration, a great attendance. There must have been 24 veterans there
That's awesome.
at Norwood View. It was very lovely. So I will have pictures for you.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thank you for remembering that, Ms. Ballard. All right, anything further? All right, all in favor of adjournment, say aye.
Aye.
We are adjourned. The time is 6:27.